Hello, thank you for watching. This is a map of 500 millibar height anomalies over the last 30 days. I think I have it here from April 20th to May 20th. I'm showing this because it's showing us what the kind of trough and ridge pattern has looked like for the last month or so across North America, the Eastern Pacific. And I think this tells us a lot of what we've dealt with in the Western US as far as weather goes. Now, the colors on this picture here, the red, these are ridges in the upper levels of the atmosphere. These kind of bluer colors here are where we've had more troughs over the last 30 days. And just kind of the quick of it here, these ridges in the upper levels of the atmosphere, that's what's really being highlighted here, tend to bring in warm weather, more fair weather, less rain, precipitation, clouds, etc. Whereas these troughs are going to be associated with cold fronts, low pressure systems, rain, snow, sometimes frost and freeze advisories, far more on the list of things to talk about when we have troughs versus ridges, where if they're persistent enough, the concern is for heat and drought. So that's kind of where we're going with this. And the kind of big thing that stands out, I think, just looking at the last 30 days is this very anomalous North Pacific ridge here in the kind of northern to northeastern Pacific. Now, that ridge just off the west coast of the U.S. has allowed some troughiness or a persistent trough to build into the western U.S., where you have upper atmospheric anomalous heights, you tend to have troughs downstream of those, and vice versa. If you have a trough persistent here in the west, you often have a ridge upstream, and I say upstream because our jet stream and our weather tends to flow from the west to the east. So that's why I'm showing this here. I think as much as this pattern has defined the last 30, maybe even the last 60 days of weather across the western U.S., I think we're finally seeing a potentially waning in influence, or maybe even a pattern shift as we go further into June. And we'll look at that in the forecast in just a minute here. What has this meant, though, this pattern for the last 30 days? Well, as far as temperature anomalies goes, that's what I'm showing you here on this map. We've had colder temperatures across the western U.S. I think in a lot of these videos over the last few weeks, you've heard me talk about frost, freeze potential. That's a common concern, at least at the end of this spring. And the cooler temperatures have almost been region-wide, save for parts of the lower Colorado River Valley, parts of southeastern California, and then getting over into kind of the Four Corners area. But most other areas, and then it's hard to see, but I have to include coastal California here, because of that anomalous ridging in the eastern Pacific, that's allowed a stronger North Pacific high-pressure system at the surface to develop over here in the northeast Pacific, and that has helped to entrench the May gray, those cloudy conditions, the foggy marine layer stratus that gets pushed on shore, keeps the sun away, and that allows those cooler ocean influence and temperatures to dominate along those California coastal areas. So it's really been kind of the cool weather, I think, that's been the hallmark of this pattern that we've been stuck in, if you will. Temperature, I shouldn't say temperature, but precipitation-wise, maybe it's been a little bit less of a story. We naturally kind of wane the magnitude of precipitation events as we go from maybe March into April and into May. We have had a little bit more wet conditions here, particularly in parts of western Montana. Some of that falling as snow in the higher elevations here. We've seen persistent precipitation events come through the Willamette Valley, western Oregon, and parts of western Washington as well. Some other areas here, in eastern Arizona, parts of New Mexico, we do have some continued drought-like conditions here. So we went into this spring, we certainly went into the last 30 days with drought conditions there, and those have only persisted with a lack of, or at least below average rainfall in that area. I think just another effect of this, if we look at GDD anomalies between April and May 20th, particularly Southern California, the influence of the May gray here, I think, is readily apparent looking at the GDD deficits. So we have not been accruing as many heat units in Southern California as we would in a typical year. That's what this map is showing us here. And some of that kind of deficit extends right into Nevada, parts of southern Idaho, Utah, southern and eastern Arizona as well. You get further to the north and seeing a little bit less of it here. But I think this, connected to the ridging, connected to the North Pacific high, it's having a wide influence on the weather, particularly the temperature pattern we've seen. Extending that over into the drought conversation, because we've seen some wet weather in here, not seeing a lot of drought development. At one time, we were at that kind of abnormally dry stage. That's not a drought status by the USDA's classifications, but we were a little bit drier here than average. But with some of the recent precipitation events, that is no longer the case. Do have some lingering drought conditions here in the elevations in northern Idaho and western Montana. And then this kind of building southwest, kind of New Mexico, Four Corners drought is something we're keeping an eye on as well, with some dry conditions here in parts of New Mexico bleeding into Arizona here as well. And that's really kind of been persisting through winter as well. One effect of that is we do see some smoke. Just looking at the current satellite here, we had another wildfire further toward the south and kind of some of the suburban Arizona areas. These, I believe, at least one of these fires here is a prescribed burn, so not a huge concern yet, but we do have some lingering dryness. We are going into summer now, right at the end of May, so that wildfire conversation is going to pick back up. Now, not expecting a huge season by any means, but some areas where we have lingering drought, like the Southwest, potentially building some heat into the Continental Divide or Interior West later this year. Naturally, we're going to have to talk about wildfires a little bit more, but I don't want to sound the alarm too much. We'll just have to see how things go as we go into the summer. Now, if we look at the current sea surface temperature anomalies across the globe here, I'm showing these because these can influence, and they often influence, both the jet stream and those upper level height patterns that I just talked about at the beginning of this video. Now, if you look at the Eastern Pacific, those are the closest, the ocean, and the Eastern Pacific is closest to where our weather is here in the Western U.S. You can see kind of two important signatures, I think, that kind of stand off, or at least jump off the page here. One is this very anomalous blob, if you will, of warm water northeast of Hawaii. Now, at times this spring, this is positioned more here, just north or to the northwest of Hawaii. And over the last maybe 30 to 45 days, it has been inching toward the northeast every day. It seems to get more and more longitude going that way. And that could be significant, certainly for that summer forecast I'm going to walk you through in just a few slides here. The second piece of that is right to the southeast of it, this cooler water that we've seen off the west coast of the United States, the west coast of Mexico, California. This has helped to entrench that May gray, I think, that we've seen in California. I think it's also helped to influence more troughs that have built into the western U.S. at times, brought temperatures down. We talked about that, GDD deficits, that jet stream pattern kind of sinking like this and then rising back up into the Midwest has helped fuel a lot of the severe weather and tornado outbreaks that they've had, unfortunately, in the Midwest, just like we saw yesterday in Iowa. So these things are all connected here. I think this ridge has played a large role in bringing some of that troughiness into the western U.S. along with these colder temperatures here. Now, I mentioned that shift in that warm blob. That definitely has my attention as we go into June. If this warm area in the Northeast Pacific is going to continue to extend toward the Northeast, and we keep this kind of negative PMM cold water signature off the west coast of the U.S., that would put anomalous warm water north of anomalously cold water. If you combine that with this developing La Nina further toward the south, you're stealing a lot of momentum in the atmosphere here with this La Nina, with this kind of negative PDO, negative PMM signature, with this warm and anomalously warm weather up to the north. All of these kind of work in tandem to induce more what we'll call atmospheric blocking across the western U.S. in summer. Now, that blocking is a concern because it tends to get us stuck in that same ridge pattern for a long period of time, maybe a month to 2 months or even a 2.5 month time period. If you get stuck underneath a ridge in the western U.S., whether that be more over British Columbia in the Pacific Northwest or more over the western U.S. Continental Divide area, that's going to bring in heat, certainly in summer. It's going to keep moisture and precipitation out. It's going to keep clouds away. It's going to increase drought conditions, and it's going to increase wildfire concerns as we go through summer. So I think the more that this tries to kind of yin and yang or shift over that cold water north to south, you're increasing the chances that we're going to deal with some kind of atmospheric blocking, some persistent ridging out west that's going to increase the heat wave risk. Now, if it does work out, as I just kind of played it out, I think it would increase more of a heat risk here over the northwest. If this kind of backs off, but we keep this colder water here, we continue to develop to La Nina, I think the heat risk this summer might be more confined toward the Four Corners region or the southwest, or at least the Continental Divide. So there's kind of two areas of concern here. One is that Four Corners region, which is kind of the consensus right now from a lot of models. Not as many of them are focused on maybe the Pacific Northwest as a drought or heat concern area here, but with some of that lingering drought I just showed you from the drought monitor in areas of the northern Rockies, the northern U.S. Rockies, I should say, I'll make that distinction. I don't think we're out of the woods here, for lack of a better word, for some heat and wildfires here as we go through the year, especially if this keeps inching toward the northeast. If I take you back to the beginning of May and show you the same exact map, so this is from yesterday, May 21st. Let's go back to the beginning of May 1st of this year. You can see that warm signature here north of Hawaii, much more centered kind of in the north central Pacific. See all this cold water here west of the US? Well, just in the last 20 days, we've shifted that. It's gotten more anomalous, shifting toward the northeast. And if anything, this water's gotten a little bit cooler toward the south. I don't like that pattern in terms of increasing drought and heat risk for a few areas across the western US. If we look at the upper level jet stream pattern here, valid as of today, we still see kind of have a weak ridge here over British Columbia in the Northeast Pacific. We still have that ridge here north of Hawaii, or I should say northeast of Hawaii. I'm drawing a Hawaii circle there on the map. That kind of in tandem is helping to bring more of these troughs into the western U.S. here today. That has been kind of the hallmark, right, of the last 30 days or so. And the result is, if you look at the high temperature anomalies here today for Wednesday afternoon, we're colder here across the west, at least north of Nevada and California. So we've seen a lot of this, I think, over the last 30 days, maybe some slightly warmer seasonal temperatures here in Central Valley. But by and large, May-gray entrenched here across Southern California. Colder temperatures across the northwest. This has been a pretty typical pattern that we've seen extending backwards about 3 to 4 weeks. Now, as a result of that trough moving in, those colder temperatures, we do have a frost advisory here in the middle Snake River Valley, including southwest Oregon as well. We do also have winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings for some of the mountains in southwest Montana here. So consistent with what I said earlier, if you have that trough entrenched across the western U.S., snow, precipitation, low pressure systems, frost, freeze advisories, etc. We're seeing more of that today here on Wednesday. Now, if you look at low temperature, the forecast for tomorrow morning from the National Weather Service, this is the reason for that frost advisory. You can see temperatures down into the mid to low 30s, getting closer and closer to that 32 degree Fahrenheit reading. If this is for Thursday morning, May 23rd, you can see some colder temperatures in the mid to high 30s for the Golden Triangle. Fortunately, here in the kind of mid to low 40s here in the Willamette Valley, so not as big of a concern there. If I take this forecast out into Friday morning, just to see how much that's going to persist, see again another morning potentially of frost conditions here in the middle to upper Snake River Valley, 33, 33, 30, 34. So this area here in kind of the middle Snake is the concern, with maybe upper 30s here in the Golden Triangle, prompting those frost advisories there that you saw in Idaho. Take a look at the current satellite imagery across the northwest. We can see that low pressure system here responsible for both the winter weather advisory, the winter storm warning here in southwestern Montana, northeastern Idaho. Also responsible for a lot of clouds, showers that are moving in across the area here as of Wednesday, just after lunchtime here. Willamette Valley seeing some of these showers and clouds here this afternoon. These are kind of mixing into parts of eastern Washington and Oregon, including now the Snake River Valley, where some of these appear to be trying to make thunder. So can't rule out kind of a brief thunderstorm here in the middle to lower Snake River Valley and parts of western Idaho here. If you look over at the radar presentation, again, you can see some of those spotty showers. It's not widespread light rain, more of these pockets of medium to heavier rain falling, again, in the Willamette Valley, southeastern Washington, northeastern Oregon, western and central Idaho as well, including now parts of the Golden Triangle over Montana. Now, I'm going to take this forecast. This is from the ECMWF. This is their height anomaly pattern here. It's similar to what we were looking at earlier, but instead of looking over the past 30 days, we're going to take this out into the future. Now, before I do it, let's just kind of orient ourselves to see, I think, a similar pattern to what we looked at, right, that we saw that we were entrenched in over the last 30 days. Now, there's that North Pacific ridge that we talked about that's been very strong at times, somewhat co-located with those anomalously warm Pacific Ocean waters underneath it. Now, it's a common kind of influence that we see where those anomalous warm temperatures and the sea surface tends to influence that ridging, or, inversely the troughing, right, and the height pattern above it. And this ridging here has tended to, like I mentioned, bring troughs into the western U.S., and that's exactly what we're seeing here today. We see that on the height pattern, but let's see where we're going in the future to see how that pattern might change. I kind of alluded to that at the beginning of the video. Now I'm going to take this forecast into Thursday and Thursday evening. This is valid now Friday through Saturday morning. You can see we actually have another piece of this trough digging in here over the Pacific Northwest as we get into late Friday, early Saturday, keeping temperatures down across the western U.S. Taking this now into Saturday into Sunday. Now early Monday, And something has kind of already changed here from the beginning of the forecast as of Wednesday afternoon, the 22nd. Now we're out to late Sunday into early Monday of next week. We have some weak ridging. Now we're trying to build in across the western U.S. Not the strongest ridge that we'll see this summer, but some weak ridging here. We have a much more potent trough now developing in the Gulf of Alaska. That big anomalously strong ridge that we've been dealing with suddenly is shifted more toward the west over the northern Pacific, or even just slightly the north-northwest Pacific here, at least from this forecast from the ECMWF. So now we have a big Gulf of Alaska trough. We have some ridging over the western U.S. That's early Monday. If I take that forecast into Tuesday, you can see this ridge only getting stronger across the western U.S. Now we have a piece of that Gulf of Alaska trough approaching the far northwestern United States. That swings through midweek, but quickly after that, we see kind of a redoubling or reentrenchment of that Gulf of Alaska trough there, and that is tending to bring more ridging into the western U.S. at the end of next week. Now, this is all the way out into the end of May, but this is the scenario that I kind of just alluded to when I was looking at those sea surface temperatures with those warmer waters trying to extend toward the northeast. You have this ridging here over the northwest. You actually have this kind of almost a little cut off upper level trough here southwest of California. You have a deep low here over the Gulf of Alaska. This almost looks a little bit blocked up, which was some of what I was concerned about just earlier in this video, where you have an upper level ridge here, you have kind of a weak low pressure system here, not a lot of momentum flowing through the western U.S. This would bring heat in parts of Washington, Idaho, Oregon, maybe even further across parts of the interior west, maybe keeping temperatures down here along coastal California, but other areas across the west looking at less precipitation over the next 10 days, and certainly warmer temperatures as that trough builds into the Gulf of Alaska. This much different than a lot of what we've talked about over the last 30 days. Now, this is a 9 to 10 day forecast at this point. This is not gospel or set in stone. The ECMWF European model is certainly a skillful weather model, but when you get out into this range, you can't believe it too much, right? You have to take it with a grain of salt. If we jump over and look at the GFS ensemble over that same time period, and I'll back this up a little bit to Monday, we might see a little bit more agreement with what we were talking about earlier. There's that first Gulf of Alaska trough trying to build in that weak ridging. This looks pretty similar. That's late Sunday into Monday from the GFS. So take that into early next week to Wednesday. You can see the influence of that trough starting to build into the Pacific Northwest. We see a strengthening ridge over the interior west. And as I take this forecast into the future, into next weekend, it actually builds some ridging now here into near Gulf of Alaska off the coast of British Columbia and bring some troughing into the western U.S. So the GFS certainly a little bit different than what we just saw from the ECMWF. So can't take that first ECMWF forecast I showed you, as absolutely what's going to happen, but it does offer kind of a hint as what we might see going through June if that kind of ocean temperature pattern continues to trend the way it is, with warmer temperatures extending toward the northeast and cooler temperatures to the south of it. Now, nonetheless, I'll take this forecast just a little bit further because you can see that ridging trying to move back in over the west and some more troughing here over the Gulf of Alaska a little bit later than the ECMWF did it. So still something of a signal of that from the GFS. At the very least, right, this pattern here much different than what we've been dealing with. And I think this pattern shift, at least toward the end of May, warrants some watching as we get further into the future. Now, I'll take you through the precipitation forecast quickly here, because we do have some immediate things to talk about. As of Wednesday evening here, this is what the ECMWF precipitation type and intensity forecast looks like. We saw some of those showers moving through the Willamette Valley. That's consistent. Some showers here in southern and central Idaho. As I take this forecast into early Thursday morning, you can see the snow increasing over the elevations here in southwestern Montana, northeastern Idaho, prompting the winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings there on Thursday. If I take the forecast into the future here as of Friday, it's just some light rainfall expected here in parts of Oregon through Friday evening. If I take that forecast further out into Saturday PM, you can see some light rain now spreading over western Montana, with perhaps just some light showers here over far western Oregon and western Washington. Take the forecast further out into early next week, right? That was when that weak ridging was developing from the ECMWF. So with that ridging, we'd expect less precipitation, less cloud cover, warmer temperatures. We're seeing that here from the ECMWF forecast. But we talked about at least by Wednesday, and this is Tuesday night, the influence of that trough near the Gulf of Alaska was going to approach the Pacific Northwest, and we can see some rainfall chances increasing toward the middle of the work week next week as a result of that. Now, the ECMWF, if you remember, was really aggressive rebuilding that ridge into the western U.S. So naturally, if the precipitation forecast as at the end of next week is essentially zero across the entire region, and that would be co-located with quite a bit of warmth as well. Now, if you look at the temperature forecast over that same time period, this is the high temperature anomalies as of today, Wednesday, the 22nd. Talked about those colder temperatures across the northwestern United States. Similar story going into tomorrow. We just highlighted the frost risk here in northeastern Idaho, I should say southeastern Idaho. Friday, continued cooler temperatures, but not quite as anomalous. Unfortunately, you can see the influence of the May gray here across coastal California on Friday. Saturday, cooler temperatures as well, and then into Sunday of early next week, and then Monday, finally that weak ridging that we talked about from the ECMWF showing up here across the western region, certainly across Oregon, parts of northern and eastern California, Nevada. Unfortunately, still seeing some kind of signature of the May gray here, but not nearly as potent as we saw kind of at the end of this immediate week here. And then that anomalous forecast, high temperature forecast, Tuesday, May 28th, looking even more aggressive as that ridge settles in over the area. Another way we can look at this, I think at least as far as the temperature story, is seeing a rolling window of 5-day temperature anomalies from the ECMWF. So this kind of rolling 5-day window starts now and ends early Monday. And if you remember, the forecast there was rather cold, at least relative to average across the western U.S. But as I move that 5-day rolling window out into next week, through the end of the next work week, you can see warmer temperatures spreading across the west: California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, parts of Oregon, Idaho, Montana, etc. So colder through kind of the weekend, but then warming up as the influence of that ridge starts to build in. If the ECMWF is correct, right, even more ridging expected near the end of next week into the next weekend, whereas the GFS at least tried to bring some troughiness back into the area next weekend before maybe advertising ridge the following few days after that in the far long range of the forecast. As far as total precipitation goes, this is a 7-day rolling window that ends Wednesday of next week. So this is our 7-day precipitation forecast. See, a lot of the focus here is again on that winter storm warning area here in the mountains of western Montana and central and northeastern Idaho. Not as much precipitation expected to fall over some of these agricultural valleys over the next 7 days. Just some light precipitation chances, I think, through the weekend. And then again, middle of the week, expecting some precipitation to move through parts of the Pacific Northwest, maybe the far northern Rockies. Again, the middle of next work week, but nothing too significant. And if I move that rolling 7-day window out into next week, you can see even less precipitation as that ridging starts to build in, at least from the ECMWF. If we look at the ECMWF ensemble, I took this out. This is all the way into early June now. Now, this forecast is essentially, this is, I think, a 12 to 13 day forecast at this point. Again, can't put too much confidence in a forecast this far out, but like the GFS, also advertising more Gulf of Alaska or Aleutian troughing and more ridging across the western U.S. Just kind of another feather in the cap of maybe this pattern shift is for real. Maybe we're bringing more ridging into the western U.S. and we're seeing less of that pattern that we showed at the beginning of the video, which entrenched that troughing at least across parts of the northern and northwestern United States. If we look at the weeklies, this is from the ECMWF extended forecast. This is essentially a June temperature anomaly forecast. This is also kind of advertising, I think, that pattern shift. If you look at the temperature anomalies here, warmer across much of the western U.S., save for parts of very coastal California and maybe even the Willamette Valley, closer to seasonal or cooler, likely an influence of those colder ocean temperatures that are lingering just offshore, and maybe, unfortunately, the May gray shifting into June gloom for coastal California as we go into the next month here. If we do kind of see a weakening of that North Pacific high, associated with that pattern shift, I think that would finally at least give us something to look for in terms of breaking the kind of hold that this May gray June gloom has on us right now. We'll have to see that when we get to it. But nonetheless, can see that this is quite a bit different from the last 30 days of temperatures that we've been dealing with. In fact, if I just jump back and show you those temperature anomalies, we were cold for a lot of these areas here over the last 30 days. Now all of a sudden advertising warmth over some of those same areas into June. So a little bit different of a pattern potentially looking at that pattern shift. If we go over the Climate Prediction Center, their forecast for that same time period, this just came out last week. You can see some of their warmth here over those same areas, parts of Washington, Idaho, the interior West, far northern Rockies, the Continental Divide here in New Mexico, eastern Arizona, similar to what we just saw from that forecast from the ECMWF, with unfortunately, at least right now, some June gloom forecasting for parts of coastal California. If I jump back and look at precipitation over that same time period, not a lot of precipitation on average in kind of this corridor across the West. So when it says equal chances, it really just means not much or little to none expected. We do get some thunderstorms in here in June, so expecting below average thunderstorm activity across parts of the eastern Four Corners region, potentially persisting some of the drought that we talked about at the beginning of the video in this region going into what's soon to be the monsoon season at the end of summer. And then the Northwest, if that ridging develops like we talked about going into June with that pattern shift, would think below average precipitation in June as well for parts of the Pacific Northwest and parts of northern Idaho as well. If we look at the latest Climate Prediction Center forecast for the summer, that is June, July, August, looking at those same temperature anomalies, you can see higher than average chances, I think, for warmer temperatures here across the interior West, across the Four Corners region. This is an area I think we're concerned about this year if we have a weaker monsoon, if we bring in more heat to this area for wildfires, just given some of the lingering dryness coming out of winter in this area. And then I would kind of extend that up into parts of the Northwest. This is an area where if we get some of these kind of periodical heat waves, we get some of that blocking that I talked about, if those warmer Pacific Ocean waters push toward the Northeast, my concern for this area, just in terms of wildfire and drought, is going to increase. That would include British Columbia as we go through 2024. I don't want to, draw a direct analogy to 2021, given a lot of the issues we dealt with that year, particularly in parts of Canada. But the possibility that we get into kind of a similar blocking pattern, I think, is there if we see that warm temperature pattern move over the cold temperature pattern here off the coast of California. Jump back and look at the summer precipitation anomalies. Again, some of these areas here, similar to what we're looking at in June, with less precipitation in the northern Rockies, less precipitation in the Four Corners region, with a slow or even weaker monsoon season overall. And just kind of jumping out all the way to July, August to September from the Climate Prediction Center, you can see that weaker monsoon season forecasted. At least right now, I don't have a ton of confidence in the monsoon forecast. The reason for that being, if we do build in that warmth or some of that atmospheric blocking here in the Pacific Northwest or over British Columbia, that would bring in a lot of heat here. If we do happen to get kind of some weak troughing here off the coast of California, some cutoff lows, if you build in heat here, you get some of the flow coming around like this. You get some flow here in the Central Plains like that. That's actually going to pull in some Atlantic moisture and Pacific moisture into the Four Corners region, perhaps even into the lower Colorado River Valley here. And suddenly you have a recipe for a pretty good or even an above average monsoon season. Now, if we have, unfortunately, a combination of wildfires or heat waves or drought issues maybe early to midsummer in the Southwest, followed by a monsoon season, that just can add insult to injury, right? Because you have burn scars and then thunderstorms or flash flooding later. That only makes it worse. I don't want to, forecast that exact scenario now, but there is a way, at least that I can see now, where you could get an average to above average monsoon out of this pattern if it unfolds that way. So I have less confidence in that below average monsoon forecast right now. We'll just see how this develops. I think there's some other things that we have to get to here in early summer before getting more confident in that forecast. I think that's my last slide here. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next week.